In 1998, WCW was the biggest wrestling company on the planet. They were a billion-dollar machine that made WWE look like a local indie promotion. 3 years later, they didn't just fail, they vanished. For decades, the wrestling world has asked one question: how did an empire this big collapse this fast? And more importantly, are we watching history repeat itself with AEW right now? Today, we're not just looking at the history books, we're looking at the boardrooms, the contract negotiations, and the fundamental mistakes that killed the giant, and why AEW might just be building the armor to avoid the same fate. To understand the fall of WCW, you have to realize they weren't just winning. They were acting like the war was already over. Eric Bischoff and the WCW management didn't just push the envelope, they tore it up. But behind the glitz of the New World Order, the foundation was rotting. They relied on one thing: star power. And when you rely solely on high-priced stars who have no stake in the company's future, you aren't building a brand. You're renting it. If you're fascinated by the business's side of wrestling, the stuff that actually dictates what you see on TV every Wednesday, make sure you're subscribed. We do deep dives like this every week that you won't find on the mainstream wrestling news sites. It wasn't one mistake, it was a chain reaction. First, the lack of long-term vision. Then, the toxic locker room culture, where established stars blocked every new talent who dared to be better than them. By the time they tried to course correct, the fans had already checked out. They were exhausted by a product that treated their intelligence as an afterthought. Now, compare that to AEW's approach to talent, like Darby Allin or MJF. They didn't just buy stars, they built them from the ground up. And that is the biggest difference in their philosophy. So, will AEW collapse? The doom and gloom critics say yes, pointing to roster overcrowding. But there's a vital difference here. AEW operates in an ecosystem where they share talent, support the independent circuit, and prioritize the wrestling-first philosophy. They aren't trying to be a global monopoly. They're trying to be the best alternative. Here's something that gets glossed over in every... WCW didn't fail because they ran out of money. They failed because they ran out of stories. Think about that. A company with Ted Turner's checkbook. A company that could outbid WWE for anyone. They failed not because of finances, they failed because nobody in that company knew how to tell a story with an ending. The NWO is the perfect example. When Kevin Nash and Scott Hall showed up in 1996, it was revolutionary. The idea of an outsider invasion, wrestlers who didn't care about WCW's rules, who were there to take over, that was fresh. That was genuinely exciting television, but what do you do with a faction once they've taken over? WCW's answer? Keep adding members, keep expanding, dilute the concept until it meant nothing. By 1998, there were so many NWO factions and sub-factions that fans needed a spreadsheet to keep track. NWO Hollywood, NWO Wolfpack, NWO Black and White, NWO B-Team. At one point, and I'm not exaggerating here, Horace Hogan was in the NWO. Horace Hogan. The mystique was gone. The threat was gone. And once the threat is gone, the story is gone. But here's the deeper creative failure, and this one is brutal. WCW was a company that did not trust its future. Every time a young, hungry, exciting new talent started generating real momentum, started getting the crowd behind them, the established veterans would shut it down, sometimes literally in the booking meetings. Sometimes in the locker room, sometimes allegedly on the fly during matches. Goldberg was the exception. The one time they let lightning strike and he got over so huge, so fast, that it actually frightened the people in charge. Because Goldberg getting over meant the old guard wasn't the only option anymore. And the old guard couldn't let that stand. So they booked his first loss on a free TV episode of Nitro. They used a cattle prod and a taser and a run-in to end the longest winning streak in wrestling history, and they never recaptured that momentum again. They had the hottest homegrown star since Steve Austin, and they actively dismantled him. Why? Because the people making the decisions weren't asking what's best for the company, they were asking what's best for me. Now we get into the stuff that made all of this not just possible, but inevitable. WCW's contract structure was, and I'm choosing this word carefully, insane. When Bischoff was throwing money at talent to win the Monday Night Wars, he wasn't just paying high salaries. He was handing out guaranteed contracts with creative control clauses to veterans who had zero incentive to do jobs, put over young talent, or make anyone look better than themselves. Hulk Hogan had creative control written into his contract. That means he could, and reportedly often did, veto booking decisions that he felt made him look weak. Think about what that means structurally. You have the biggest star in your company, the guy at the top of the card, the guy selling the most merchandise, and he has a legal right to override your bookers. That's not a locker room. That's a hostage situation. And it cascades down. When Hogan can veto anything, Nash and Hall feel like they can too. And when those guys feel that way, everyone underneath them starts playing political games to protect their own spot. The entire creative culture becomes about self-preservation instead of storytelling. Meanwhile, over at WWE, Vince McMahon was going through the worst period of his professional career. The steroid trial, the death of kayfabe from the curtain call, the loss of Bret Hart, Steve Austin's injury. For about a year and a half, it genuinely looked like WWE might not survive. But here's the difference. In that desperate period, Vince McMahon made a decision that changed everything. He handed a live mic to a stone-cold Steve Austin and a Degeneration X and essentially said, "I don't know what works anymore, but you might. Let's find out." He gave up control to find the answer. WCW tightened its grip and refused to find the answer. One company found the Attitude Era. The other company found a cattle prod finish to end Goldberg's streak. WCW was in full crisis mode, but the people running it still didn't know it. They had one more trick up their sleeve, the finger poke of doom. The 4th of January, 1999, the Georgia Dome. Hulk Hogan pokes Kevin Nash in the chest with one finger, Nash sells it like he was shot, and Hogan wins the championship. And they were done. But the catastrophic business decisions kept coming. The Russo era brought worked shoot angles and title changes so frequent that the championship belt lost all meaning. They brought in stars from outside wrestling, Dennis Rodman, Jay Leno, Karl Malone, spending enormous sums of money on celebrities who couldn't work a match and didn't move the needle permanently. They were spending more money to draw less audience. That is a death spiral. That is a company that has lost the plot so completely it's spending its way toward the exit. By 2000, the ratings were in freefall. The PPV buy rates had collapsed. The live attendance, which had been record-setting just 2 years earlier, was now embarrassing in arenas that felt half-empty. AOL Time Warner, which had acquired Turner's properties, looked at WCW and saw a liability. They didn't see a diamond in the rough. They didn't see a turnaround project. They saw a problem to be solved. And on the 23rd of March, 2001, WWE purchased WCW for a reported $4.2 million. A company that was worth hundreds of millions at its peak. Gone for $4 million. Because empires don't just collapse from the outside. They collapse from within. Okay, so now you know the real story of WCW. And I can already hear the comments forming, but AEW is making the same mistakes. Let me give that argument the respect it deserves because it's not entirely wrong. AEW has real problems. Let's not pretend otherwise. The roster is overcrowded. At any given time, there are talented wrestlers on the AEW roster who haven't appeared on television in months. That's a legitimate creative concern. When you have too many characters and not enough story real estate, nobody gets over the way they should. The TNT and TBS situation has also been unstable. Getting moved around the schedule, getting preempted, competing with NBA and other sports programming that's genuinely damaging for building consistent viewership habits, and yes, the spending. Tony Khan has spent aggressively on talent. CM Punk, Chris Jericho, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Adam Cole, Samoa Joe, the list goes on. Some of those acquisitions have paid off brilliantly. Others have been complicated, controversial, and expensive. WCW was trying to monopolize wrestling. Every acquisition, every signing, every decision was made with one goal: remove the competition. Sign everyone who could possibly threaten you. AEW isn't perfect. No wrestling company ever is. But the difference, the crucial difference, is that AEW is making bets on the future. They're building MJFs and Darbys and Willow Nightingales who will still be drawing audiences in 10 years. And that is why the WCW comparison, as fun as it is to make, ultimately doesn't hold. Empires fall when they stop believing in what comes next. AEW? They're still writing the next chapter. That's it for today. If you made it this far, you already know you belong here. Subscribe if you haven't. The bell icon means you won't miss a single deep dive. Drop in the comments, do you think AEW can survive long term, or are the cracks already showing? I read every single one. See you next week.